Princess Dracula, Special Online Version, Book 1, Part 3.
The men turned their horses and then rode back out the gate. Prince Dracula followed them without looking back. Roxandra stared in surprise. Her father had not said a single word to her. "Go, child," Mother Superior said. "Quickly!" Roxandra snapped the reins on the horse's neck. It trotted forward, catching up with the soldiers' heavier war horses, with their burdens of armor and knights. She urged it faster until she rode just behind her father. She thought to call to him, but the man's straight back was as imposing as his horse and armor. It created a wall she didn't dare penetrate, so she rode in silence. But that didn't stop her from looking at everything as they passed. Roxandra had not seen the world outside the convent gates since her 8th birthday, when her father brought her. It had been cold then too. Staying at the convent seemed like a great adventure. No one had told her she would be there for 10 years. But with the war and the pressure on her father to align himself for political gain, he had thought it safest to keep her there. The trees here were no different than those on the convent grounds, the fields no less covered with snow. But each one she passed reminded her that she was entering a new world, a new life. She wondered if she would see her mother, or if she would be taken straight away to her husband or to her father's court. The thought of her mother, tenderness, a hand on Roxandra's cheek, soft grey eyes, made her heart ache. She pushed the memory away, like she had done 1,000 times before. It had been difficult in the early years. Now it was second nature, much like the prayers and the hard discipline of mind and body the nuns had instilled in her. Roxandra's stomach made an alarming gurgling noise. She prayed no one else could hear it over the sound of the horses. She had not eaten since the raisin bun and wondered when the procession would stop to eat. Her father would not let her starve. Would he, though? They rode through the morning. The high road had been swept clear of snow by the wind, allowing them to make good time through the forests and fields. The last of the snow clouds had passed, leaving a clear blue sky above. Roxandra delighted in the sun on her face and shoulders, even the winter sun. Most of her time in the convent had been spent indoors, studying, praying, and learning the womanly arts of sewing, needlepoint, and weaving. The riding lessons had been the wonderful exception. When the sun reached its zenith, Prince Dracula barked an order. His knights reached into their coats and pulled out small loaves of bread, which they began to eat without slowing their pace. One of the men rode up beside Roxandra and extended a loaf. She took it and smiled. "I thank you, sir." The knight nodded. He was handsome. He had a strong jaw with a tidy beard and hazel eyes that had lingered on her before he rode away and resumed his place in the line. Perhaps he was a young lord, serving in the ranks of the voivode's army. Maybe he was even the young lord her father wanted her to marry. She amused herself with the fantasy as they rode. The sun began descending in the sky, and Roxandra grew cold. The air was still frosty, and her breath formed clouds that streamed past her. She supposed the men in their armor were much colder, but they were trained knights, inured to such discomforts. Even so, she wished they would stop at an inn or some other place of rest. She would prefer an inn. She'd never stayed in one before. There might even be music. They continued riding as the sun turned the sky red and gold with the promise of night soon to come. It grew darker. The riders in front of her became grey ghosts, barely visible in the dying light. At a barked command from her father, the men lit torches, sending a warm orange-yellow glow onto the snowy woods around them. The heat from the closest ones reached Roxandra's face, providing some warmth in the cold dark. Her stomach rumbled again, but she said nothing. There had to be a reason they were riding so late into the night.
"Halt!" Her father's voice rang through the column of men. "Bring the princess forward!"
The handsome knight reached over and took the reins from her hands. He kicked his horse in the ribs, then led Roxandra through the ranks of men. Her father had already dismounted. The knight stopped his horse and hers a moment later.
Her father raised his eyes, made black by the dim light. "Dismount, daughter!"
A knight went to one knee beside her horse. Another offered her his hand. Roxandra took it and swung down, lightly stepping on the kneeling knight's thigh before alighting on the ground.
Prince Dracula nodded his satisfaction. "Men, dismount and make camp. I will rejoin you in the morning. Daughter, this way."
Her father held out an arm for her to take and placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. He led her away from the camp and down a path just wide enough for the two of them to walk abreast. It had been cleared of snow, and the brush on all sides had been cut back. He led her, without looking at her, down a long slope to the bottom of a valley. She was desperate to ask where they were going, but knew better than to say anything. Trees surrounded them, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in either direction. Then the night was split by the orange glow of two torches planted in the earth on either side of a cave mouth. Prince Dracula took Roxandra's hand off his arm, gripped it hard, and led her inside. She expected the cave to be darker than the forest. Instead, candles had been placed along the narrow tunnel leading into the earth. She gripped her father's hand. Unable to keep silent longer, she said, "Father, where?"
Be silent.
She closed her mouth. The tunnel opened wide into a large chamber. Dozens of candles were placed along the walls, giving a bright yellow glow and heating the room. For the first time all day, Roxandra felt warm. She pulled back her hood. "I am indeed on an adventure. If only Tony and Madison—"
"Is this she, my lord?"
Roxandra turned. There was another chamber, deeper than the one she stood in. 4 men emerged. All were large, with armor on their bodies and swords at their sides. They examined her head to foot with their eyes, so much so that she began to blush. Then they turned back to Vlad Dracula.
He nodded. Is everything prepared?
Yes, my lord, the tallest man said, but will it work?
I do not know, Prince Dracula said. The books say that it is a true ritual, but there are none alive who attempted it. I only know that we must take every chance if we are to defeat the Turks.
The tall man looked at Roxandra, something resembling pity in his eyes. A strange wind blew in and the yellow glow in the room softened.
Even this, my lord.
Yes, Dracula's voice was cold and hard. Even this.
Suddenly he grabbed Roxandra's hand and he shoved her hard, propelling her into the 4 men.
Strip her!
Roxandra couldn't understand what he was saying. It didn't make sense. Then the first man yanked her cloak over her head, leaving her caught in the dark material. One man grabbed her arm and shoved at it, trying to push it back inside the cloak. Roxandra tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. Another set of hands grabbed her from behind, shoving the cloak up her back. Someone rubbed a hand against her backside, making her scream. "This cannot be happening. I am a princess!" She struggled, whipping her body, trying to kick at the men, but unable to see anything. They were around her, quiet, save for the grunts of effort as they tried to tear away her clothing. Then the cloak slipped off, and she could see again. Her father stood on the other side of the chamber, watching her with no expression. The tale of the villagers impaled to frighten the advancing Turks leapt into her mind. "No, I am his daughter. He wouldn't." The man behind her caught both her arms and another grabbed her legs. The other 2 pulled out long, sharp daggers. Roxandra screamed and tried to pull away as they began cutting away her black robes. Her legs were naked first, then her groin and backside. She struggled to cover her body, but the man behind her kept her hands pinned behind her back. The other 2 kept cutting, pulling away the last of the cloth, leaving her breasts bare for them all to see. She screamed again, releasing her rage and helplessness. Her father slapped her across the face, hard and fast and unforgiving.
I said be silent.
"Father, why—" He slapped her again hard enough to make her head spin. His eyes bore no warmth, only a cold determination that left Roxandra's heart shattered, tears mingling with the dirt on her cheeks.
Raise her.
"Father!"